Okay, last up, we're going to be going over HIV and AIDS. So, HIV is human immunodeficiency virus. AIDS stands for acquired immune deficiency syndrome. So, HIV is the actual disease, it's the virus that you contract. AIDS is a syndrome that can develop because of an HIV infection. And I have a YouTube video that is here. It's linked in the PowerPoint. Those of you watching who are at Santa Fe, you'll see the PowerPoint. And you don't have to watch it necessarily, but it's just an example of going back to the first video, disparities in healthcare in regards to, yeah, different people, their, in this case, like their sexuality. HIV has an interesting history, which we'll get into. And this is kind of an example. So HIV, the first known case was in 1959. A man who died in what was then the Belgian Congo, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo. There are some suspicions that there were cases that were even prior to this. So there was some researchers, or a researcher at least, who died in Sweden, but who had been to the Congo, and so there's potential that that individual might have also had it. But yeah, this is kind of some of the first known cases originate out of like Central Africa. In the 80s and then the early 90s, the disease spread quite a bit because what happened is that, the disease started to get spread by individuals coming into contact with each other. It's a bloodborne pathogen. And so one group of individuals that was especially susceptible ended up being homosexual men. The reason for this is because the way in which, and I apologize for being a little graphic, but it's the anatomy. I'm not explaining it for any other reason than the anatomy. Um, the way in which not all, but a lot of homosexual men have sex involves penile anal intercourse, like penis and anus intercourse. And when that happens, anytime you have any kind of insertion of anything into the anus, you have a lot of capillaries that are right at the surface of the colon. And so that friction from someone putting a penis or anything else into your rectum, it causes some of those capillaries to break. And so there's a little bit of bleeding that can occur, right? Well, when you engage in sex and you put a penis anywhere, and that eventually the finale of the sex act is ejaculation. And so what happens is you have the mixing of seminal fluid and blood in the act of, you know, male to male, penis to anus sex. Now it can be transmitted other ways as well, but that sex, that form of sex, that sex act, it makes it very easy for this pathogen to spread. And during the 70s and 80s, there was a lot of non-acceptance of LGBTQ individuals in the US and around the world for that matter. And so there were a lot of individuals who were engaging in, homosexual sex that were gay, and they didn't use protection because we have cures and treatments for things like chlamydia, gonorrhea, a lot of other like more common or at the time that were more common or more commonly aware of STIs. And these individuals didn't feel like, well, we don't need to protect against pregnancy, right? Because, you're not going to get pregnant. So there's no reason to wear a condom. And people weren't aware of this disease. Well, so as a result, it spread very quickly amongst this specific population for this specific reason, right? As a result, over time, what ended up happening is it was noticed that a lot of young, specifically homosexual men were developing this disease. And it was still in like the early stages of understanding what it was, what was happening. Tabloids and media called it the gay plague. And that video that I linked, it's actually it's the first press conferences where HIV and AIDS was discussed in the White House press briefings. And it's referred to as the gay plague by reporters and things. And you can hear it's dismissed as like, oh, this isn't a thing, that people are joking about it, they're making jokes about it and stuff. And it's a case of, well, uh, what ended up happening is as a result, it wasn't really taken seriously. A lot of people saw it as, well, this is just what those people get for the lifestyle they lead. But it had nothing to do with them, doing something wrong. It was just the nature of the disease and how it was transmitted, right? Um, the reality is every health problem that anybody has is a result of choices they made. And so, you know, when you have whatever disease, it's because of choices. We could all live healthier and stuff. So we all do things that are potentially risky. Well, this specific population ended up having a very high incidence because of, again, just the mechanism of transmission. Well, then over time, though, it started to spread to other people because it was a bloodborne pathogen. And so it started being spread through other forms, such as blood transfusions or men who would become infected having sex with women. And, again, transmitting, their seminal fluid into the vaginal canal, very high chance of infection that way. And so a lot of women became infected, and you started having kids infected when their parents had it and gave birth, or were getting blood transfusions. And it caused, yeah, the AIDS pandemic. And I pointed all out to say that, like, if you're interested, there's a very good book that kind of explores the roots and what happened that led to the AIDS pandemic called "And the Band Played On: Politics, People, and the AIDS Epidemic" by Randy Schultz. He actually himself died of complications from HIV in 1994, but it's a very good, I think, book that kind of shows information about epidemiology and about yeah, just the demographics of how like these pandemics can unfold. It's very interesting. There's also a movie, but I have not seen the movie. I've read the book, but I haven't seen the movie or anything. So if you have an interest in those kinds of in public health, epidemiology and stuff, and especially I know it's a few years away, but all of y'all would have lived through the COVID pandemic. Um, it's yeah, interesting, I think, from a public health point of view. Excuse me. So again, it's transmitted through blood, through semen, through vaginal fluids, and breast milk, the HIV, anyway, human immunodeficiency virus. Um, it can, it's the initial rate, again, infection rate was so high among gay men, specifically due to the physiology of male to male anal sex. It can still happen in other forms. However, the risk of transmission is very low. So, in other words, if a woman was infected with HIV and they had unprotected sex with a man, it's not zero, but it's a very, very small chance that there would be transmission from the woman to the man. Now, the opposite, if a man were having sex with a woman and the man was infected with HIV and they had sex with a woman, they're a much higher chance. If you had two women having sex with each other and one was HIV positive and one was not, very, 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 very low chance of infection because of just the physics or mechanics or however you want to describe it. I don't want to be too graphic, but I know I've probably already been more graphic than some of you would like. But just because of the nature of the sex acts that you're engaging in, um, it's much less common, right? Some other forms of infection also include IV drug use, needle stick injuries, blood transfusions, and then mother to fetus infant transmission. But it's a lot much rarer. We have ways of preventing that now. But you'll also see that it's a very high incidence of IV drug users, people who, yeah, maybe got blood transfusions in the 80s or early 90s. There might be a chance, but again, that's we screen blood very heavily now, so those things don't happen. In terms of needle stick injuries, it's important to know that in terms of us, because we as healthcare providers, we have a risk of being, infected with some of these things because of needle sticks. The chance of getting HIV is very low. The biggest thing to worry about with needle stick injuries is hepatitis. Hepatitis is like the it's a much more robust, I guess we'll call it, disease. It can live a lot easier on fomites than HIV. HIV as a virus is somewhat uh, undeveloped or immature, if you want to think of it that way. It does not live very effectively on fomites outside of human blood or other bodily fluids. So once it's on a surface or something, it's very unstable and does not really live. So that's not to say that you can't get it from a needle stick injury. You can, but it's just that other diseases are a much higher risk for us as healthcare providers. Some other things just to know about HIV and AIDS. There's also, and a lot of these things have kind of been debunked. It's a lot more common knowledge now, but you still have people that are unaware of these things. They're afraid that they're going to get it if they touch somebody with HIV. That was something that people worried about in the 90s. Like, yeah, they thought if you touch someone, they could get it. I mean, you had nurses that were refusing to care for HIV patients. Doctors refusing to care for them because they were afraid of getting it for these reasons and stuff. And it's just not true. Um, The you can't get it through touch, you can't get it through sweat or saliva or tears or anything like that. Just blood, semen, vaginal fluids, and breast milk. Now, I will say, I said you couldn't get it through any of those things. That is not technically true, but I want to make an illustration of something. You could technically get HIV through something like sweat, because there is virus present in sweat, and so that's why sometimes people might think you get it. In order to become infected with HIV from like sweat, you would have to take like a swimming pool of sweat from a person who was infected with HIV and like drink that swimming pool of sweat. So I'm not trying to be super gross, but I'm just saying. I'm making the point that we say you can't get it. Technically, it is possible. Like it is in the most technical way possible. It's possible because there's sometimes can be virus present, but you're not going to get it. It's just not, it is not possible. It's just not going to happen. So unless you want to drink, gallons and gallons of sweat, it's not going to happen. So how do we diagnose and treat it? So HIV again is the actual disease. That's we diagnose it by just testing for the antigen or antibodies in the blood or saliva. So if they have the antigens to it, that means that, yeah, you have HIV because otherwise your body wouldn't be creating the antigens. AIDS is acquired immune deficiency syndrome, and this is a condition you develop because of the prevalence of the virus. So, AIDS or HIV attacks the CD4 T cells, and as it does that, it lowers that T cell count, right? So the CD4 count, when it gets low enough, that's when we say someone has AIDS. Another way to qualify it is the amount of viral load of HIV. If that's high enough, we say someone has AIDS. So how do we treat it? There's no cure. However, antiretrovirals combined with managing symptoms and complications mean that people that become infected with HIV have very good prognosis. They can have very long, healthy lives. You will hear sometimes people talk about, oh, this person has been cured. Like, and again, don't know when you might be watching this, but Magic Johnson is kind of seen as like a very famous person that has HIV. And you'll occasionally hear news stories, or at least you used to, about like, oh, Magic Johnson's been cured of AIDS. What they mean is that he had no viral load detected in his blood tests. So that could mean that, yeah, he has no virus present, that he's been cured. But it also could just mean, which is probably more likely, that the count is so low that it's not detectable anymore. You'd have to draw like a lot of blood before you finally found evidence of the virus. Like it's still there, but it's just a very, very small amount. So effectively, it's kind of effectively a cure if you want to think of that. But there's not really a cure. It's just keeping the viral load down so low that it doesn't have any effect on you. Or I shouldn't say it doesn't have an effect. It doesn't have the kinds of effect that we often associate with, the worst parts of AIDS. So yeah, it's not a cure, but just by taking antiretrovirals and managing the symptoms and potential opportunistic infections that can come along with, an HIV infection, it can mean people can have very long lives and not really any serious complications as a result of it, which is very positive. However, we still want to, try to prevent people from getting it. And so to that end, we try to encourage people to use safe sex practices. There's also a drug that is available. There's a few drugs, but the most common one is called PrEP. PrEP is a drug that if you take it, it is virtually impossible for you to contract HIV. So if someone is engaging in a lot of sex, practices or acts or something that we feel is putting them at, as healthcare providers, it's putting them at a very high risk for potentially getting HIV. We can encourage them to take PrEP as a way to try to prevent contraction of the disease. Or if you have a patient who maybe they're HIV positive, they have a partner who's HIV negative, and they're trying to prevent transmission, PrEP can be a kind of safeguard to allow them to have a sex life where they're not as concerned about transmission. Um, so again, just something to keep in mind because again, you'll sometimes see some of y'all might have been familiar with PrEP already, just because there's advertisements for it and things. And yeah, we're trying to keep the incidence as low as possible for all these STIs, and this is an effective way of doing it with HIV and AIDS. And then this is something we'll do in class, but I'll just say, yeah, if you're maybe doing this with a partner or something, if you're watching this, maybe studying, if you want, you can pair up and practice taking a health history or interviewing your partner. I always make sure to say, don't actually feel like you need to divulge all your sex history. Just like in lab, we pretend we say like, oh, we're doing physical assessments on each other, and we pretend we're the patient. We're like, oh, what are you here for? Oh, I had a hip fracture. You didn't actually have a hip fracture. You're just saying it because you're pretending to be a patient. Same thing here. You can make up whatever kind of sex life you imagine. You do not have to share your personal one. And again, we'll be doing this in person in class or over Zoom together in class to practice. But just if you're not able to make it or something like that, it's something that's useful. And the reason I have people do this is I think it's one, we can talk about it afterwards, kind of say what was easy, what was hard, but also just give you practice doing this because these are awkward conversations we have to have with people. It's not like it's easy. It's not something that just comes naturally to people. Like, oh yeah, it's really easy for me to ask people about what's going on with their genitals and what kind of sex they engage in. It's something that becomes easy because you practice it, right? What makes you good at something is practice. And so this is just, yeah, you practice doing it now. It's okay if you laugh when we practice it in class. If you feel like you're, struggling to not laugh and smile because it's your friend and you're asking these questions, it's okay. Like it's okay because the reality is you're getting this out now. You're, you're going through this now. And so hopefully it'll mean that when you do it in real life, you're like, okay, I'm prepared. I know how to talk about this stuff so that maybe I won't get so blushed in the face and won't be so nervous about it. But yeah, that's it. If you have any questions or anything, feel free to reach out. And then I can actually, again, this is also in the PowerPoint and we'll watch it in class. But once y'all do your health history, this is an example of actually a physician doing one that I think is really good and useful, and it just kind of shows the style and a method you can use that I think kind of makes it approachable and yeah, it keeps it non-judgmental, keeps it respectful, but also doesn't, make it embarrassing or anything for anyone. So yeah, hopefully all this was useful and see you in the next video. Again, I keep saying that I won't see you in the next video, but good luck on your tests and everything. And yeah.